Alrighty, and we are back. 2020 College Football Podcast number 5 is coming to y'all either Sunday night or Monday morning or whenever y'all are listening to that for that matter. Week 7, maybe 6 or 7, because of the weird COVID season that we're having right now and how all these different conferences are starting at different times. I'm not really going off of what the official week is. I kind of forgot about that from the first podcast just because it's so tough to keep up with. So I'm just, at the beginning of these introductions, I'm going to start going off of 2020 College Football Podcast number X. So right now we have the podcast number 5 on tap for today. We're going to talk about the SEC, specifically some games within the SEC that happened this past weekend, and one official announcement, an official analytical take on one of the SEC teams. You guys don't want to miss that. Then we'll round up a little bit more north to the upper south in that, and we'll talk about the ACC, specifically some of the games that happened in the ACC with UNC and Clemson, and we'll also briefly touch on Notre Dame and how Saturday's win against Florida State may be less about the win and more about writing on the wall for Notre Dame. Y'all won't want to miss that one either. Just a couple of announcements before we get into this podcast. I'm not talking about the Big 12, so I'm not talking about the Red River rivalry. I said that in a previous podcast. I'm no longer talking about the Big 12. This podcast is not going to change. Even though we had a rivalry game, it's not. I'm not talking about the Big 12. Another thing I'm going to say, some of y'all might be wondering about BYU, ranked number 15 in the country. Actually, they probably went up after this. I'm looking at the scores right now, but this is for the past week. They're probably closer to 10 right now. I'm not talking about BYU either. I'm not talking about 24-year-old Mormons who have just got done with their mission trip riding a bike around Utah with a white shirt and a black tie. I'm not talking about them. I'm not going to discuss that. I'm not going to waste time to talk about BYU. So if y'all want someone to talk about BYU and you want me to talk about BYU, I'm not talking about BYU, but if you want someone to talk about the football team that follows the Latter-day Saints and Joseph Smith and all that craziness, you can write me in the comment section or DM me on Instagram, Twitter, whatever you want, and I can try to find a source for you to listen to BYU football and the takes week by week. I can try to find something like that. And then lastly, what we'll be talking about for today, I'm going to give y'all a brief just list of who I think the top teams are in the country as of right now, and we will update this list as we go on. I'm not going to give rankings because I will probably be talking about who I think is the best team in college football and the second best team throughout this podcast. But as we get closer into the playoff, I'll start to formulate my playoff projections, and I'll start talking about who I think is going to play, how these teams could be advantaged. And obviously, as we get closer to the end of the football season, games will start being more impactful. The college football season will basically play itself out. I mean, this is how the season is all the time. Right now, there's a little bit of inflation within the rankings, being that we haven't had two conferences start playing yet. And although there are going to be playing limited schedules, and some of these teams still are in the AP poll, no one can convince me that Ohio State is the 6th best team in the country. It's just not happening. So these teams, although they still are in the poll, they're being shifted because they haven't played yet. And all this is going to change once they play, for better or for worse for that matter. I mean, only it's going to take one loss for a Big Ten team, and they're probably going to drop a substantial amount of spots. And what's going to be tough is I don't know if they can get back because they have less games, but we'll worry about that when this season comes around. So diving in here first, let's talk about the SEC. The games I'm going to go over here in the SEC, I'm going to talk about Tennessee versus Georgia, Alabama versus Ole Miss, Florida at Texas A&M, and then my main claim today, and let's lead off with this just since I got it right here on me. LSU is officially done. They were a one-hit wonder. It was an amazing year under Joe Burrow. It was a great year having Joe Brady. It was fantastic. Congratulations, LSU. I suggest you record each one of the 2019 games, save them to a hard drive, print them on a DVD, or save them permanently to your television. Do whatever you have to do. Maybe your DirecTV account. Do whatever you have to do to keep hold of that 2019 season, because you will never see one of those maybe again, and certainly not here soon. LSU looks bad, very, very bad at the beginning of this season, and it's honestly just very disappointing, especially yesterday. You're playing Missouri. you look at the talent difference between LSU and Missouri, and you look at where the programs are. I mean, Missouri has a brand new head coach, and I believe they definitely don't have a long-time head coach. I'm pretty sure it's a new head coach. Maybe he's a second year. But yeah, they have a new quarterback, Kelly Bryant, obviously gone and everything, and LSU cannot punch it in 4 tries from the 1-yard line to win the game. That is incredibly problematic, and I mean, that's just a really bad showing for LSU. You got 4 tries. You're the more athletic program. You're the better program. You're certainly the more historical program, and you can't get 1 yard against Missouri. That is very, very sad. Officially cementing LSU in the clown category for this year. The one-hit wonder is officially over. They are done. Now, moving into Tennessee versus Georgia, I was fortunate enough to go to the UNC Virginia Tech game. I got drafted in the lottery, which, by the way, was a ton of fun. I'll make sure to talk about that briefly when we hit down to UNC versus Virginia Tech. But with that, I was only able to catch really the second, about midway through the third quarter to the end of the game, of that second half. I wasn't able to watch much of the first half, but I did see Tennessee was leading. And when I went back and watched the highlights, Tennessee was in control in the first half, was playing really, really well. And what happened really was Georgia just outperformed them. Georgia, and this is probably going to be the best thing I say about Georgia the entire night. And I want to get this out of the way because Georgia does deserve credit here. Kirby Smart and his coaching staff make halftime adjustments better than anyone I know. Georgia can play a first half and then come out in the second half and look like a completely different team. Different personnel, different players. It's like their coaching staff is so good at making halftime adjustments that when they come out of halftime, it doesn't even look like the same team. And that's to their credit. It's won them a lot of games in the past, and it will probably continue to win them a lot of games in the future. Being able to make halftime adjustments is a big deal, especially in college football, where certain teams, I mean, you have to adjust. Sometimes teams do not show up with the same package that you saw on film that you were studying that week, you were preparing for, and they come out and play something completely different, show you a different offensive scheme or defensive scheme for that matter. Let's say they run a lot of coverage, they like to play bump and run coverage, and all of a sudden you show up and they're playing 10 yards off of you. You got to make a halftime adjustment. You have to make a series by series adjustment to try to keep an offense to be able to sustain drive. And the same thing goes on defense, just vice versa there. And Georgia does a great job of that. And that is just a really commendable approach. But in the second half, the defense stepped up, forced a lot of turnovers to Tennessee. Tennessee's not a great team. Okay, let's just go out here and say that right now. Tennessee is not a great team. Georgia is a good team, and they were able to handle business in the second half. We'll make sure to touch on Alabama and Georgia this upcoming matchup this weekend, which is going to be an absolutely great game at the end of this segment here, or at the end of this portion of the segment. Alabama goes on the road to Ole Miss, a game with, I think it was 1,300 yards of offense. It was absolutely insane. Neither one of these defense could stop anything for that matter. I'm sorry I can't talk about my brain is just dead today. Come on, wake up. Neither one of these defenses could stop a nosebleed if they had to. It was honestly kind of shocking. We've seen this with Alabama here in recent history where they have a really difficult time with defensive success. This is not how it used to be for Alabama. I mean, I'm sure some of y'all remember. It used to be a shocker when Alabama gave up more than 10 points. It was insane. You never saw that. Alabama came out on defense. They were this mean, nasty team. Not in a bad way, not in a dirty way, just this nasty, tough, strong, fast defense that knocked you off the ball and was so great. And, I mean, it was just unbelievable. You used to trot out teams that walked on the field, and you're like, how in the world are these teams got any chance to play? How can you even block them? You know, it wasn't too long ago in 2016, the 2016-2017 season, that Alabama had I think it may have been the best defense in college football history. That was the year Deshaun Watson took Clemson and beat Alabama in the sequel of the national championship games. But that Alabama defense was seriously one of the best ones I've ever seen in my life. And I don't know what has happened. I don't know if it had the combination of maybe Pruitt leaving or something of that nature, but Alabama's defense has been not necessarily on a big decline, but it has gone down since that outstanding defense with those players, and it's honestly kind of surprising and definitely problematic for Alabama. They have a really difficult time stopping Ole Miss on the rush there, and Ole Miss was almost. Ole Miss had success on the ground and through the air. Alabama did the same, by the way. Alabama had great success. Ole Miss can't stop anyone either. And Najee Harris had a breakout game. I believe he had 5 rushing touchdowns, which is is just incredible. But Alabama wins. They have a huge matchup against Georgia, and I'm gonna go ahead and let the cat out of the bag here. I think Alabama is the superior team to Georgia. I'm not sure it's actually close. With this game being in Tuscaloosa, I think here's the main points that I really think Alabama. If we just look at it across the board, you line up position by position, coaching staff against coaching staff, recruiting history versus recruiting history, and most importantly, quarterback versus quarterback. Everything points towards Alabama. Alabama's got a better coaching staff. They have better quarterback play. They match up with Georgia at every single position on the field. Literally every single one. Maybe except defensive line you would give to Georgia. But recruiting-wise, talent, Alabama matches up with Georgia in every way possible. And there's very few teams that can say that. Alabama's one of them. And I think it's going to be a very tall task for Georgia to try to overcome on this. Now, let me know in the comments section or through social media if y'all want me to do a separate preview for Alabama, Georgia, and I will break down in-depth averages, season averages on points, yards per game, yards given up per game, all that. I will do that. I got no problem with doing that. Just let me know if y'all want that. If you don't, that's perfectly fine too. I can do that for y'all, and we can dive into that a little bit deeper then. But just coming out here and saying it right now, I think Alabama beats Georgia in the area of 10 to 14 points. Maybe even more if Alabama's able to get rolling. No pun intended, but if they are able to get rolling, I think it could be a very long night next Saturday night for Georgia and that coaching staff with their relatively inexperienced team. Last thing in the SEC here, we're going to go to College Station. Florida goes on the road, loses to Texas A&M by 3 points. This was a game, obviously I was at the Carolina game, so I wasn't able to watch a ton of this. I wasn't able to analyze it to the depth of which I would want, mainly because I wasn't really able to watch it. I was only able to watch a little bit of the highlights when I was falling asleep last night. It was a struggle to stay awake, honestly. But Florida goes on the road, loses. Now, Florida's going to have a lot of chances. Florida's season is not over, okay? Florida's got a lot of stuff ahead of them. They're going to get a chance to play Georgia. If they run the table, they're definitely going to play probably in Alabama in coming out of the SEC West, because the SEC West is really down this year. Even Arkansas is on the uptick. That's how bad the SEC West is, for the exception of Alabama. And even Alabama doesn't look that strong, but that's for a different point. So Florida's got a ton of stuff ahead of them. There's a lot of this season is far from over. There's still a lot of grass to be cut for Florida, and it will be interesting to see how well they can rebound off of this loss. And we'll have to watch that. I'm not surprised Texas A&M won. With the amount of ranked teams and highly ranked teams that Texas A&M plays every single year in and year out from both sides of the conference, but specifically on the SEC West, it was only a matter of time before they were able to knock off one of them, and this was the one they knocked off. A key signature victory for Jimbo Fisher and his administration, quote-unquote, his coaching staff mainly, at Texas A&M. This is a victory that Texas A&M really needed. They were searching for that signature win. They could never find it. Couldn't get it the last couple years. Kellen Mond's been inconsistent, very inconsistent for that matter. Texas A&M did not look like a very good team up to this point, beating Vandy by 5, and then struggling. Who do they play next? I can't remember. But they did not look great in that game either. But now A&M's starting to look a little bit better. But again, the Achilles heel for the Aggies has been inconsistent play, and we'll have to see if they can ride this high ground throughout the rest of their games, or if you're going to see a massive dip, because it would be very expected to see A&M stumble either next game or the next couple of games, riding off that really high victory. You can see teams lose focus, get a little arrogant about what they are. Well, we just beat Florida, and they don't wake up for the next team, and bam, they fall. This happens all the time in college football, so we'll have to watch that. So really, this game between Florida and A&M was less about A&M's win and more about just what we're going to see with the programs going forward. What's the prognosis of this game? Is A&M going to be able to maintain that standard of play that it took to beat Florida? And is Florida going to be able to rebound? And if both these teams do that, both these teams are certainly on the uptick. Now, they're obviously at different levels. Florida's still got a much higher ceiling than A&M does right now. But Florida, in terms of their expectations for this season, I think you have to say they have a lower floor comparatively to A&M just because of the high expectations. But obviously, Florida's season is far from over. A lot of good things ahead for the Gators, especially if they're able to win out. Now let's go to the Upper South a little bit more, and we're going to talk about UNC Miami. I was at this game, as I said multiple times now. Got to sit in the student section, won the student lottery. It was a great time. Tons of fun. They had a socially distanced, had to wear mask, had mask police there. I am not joking. These guys that were wearing, some of them were wearing these big neon yellow shirts, and other ones were wearing these gray jackets. They were kind of undercover, and they were walking in between the stands and making sure we were sitting on these dots and making sure we were distant and making sure we had the mask on and the whole 9 yards, or the whole first down for that matter. I don't get the 9-yard thing. That makes no sense, but that's for a different point. So UNC won the game. Carolina looks very, very good. When Carolina wanted to look good, the team really, really looked good. And Virginia Tech is not bad, but they are not at the level that Carolina is right now. I'm not sure if UNC is a top 5 team. That kind of scares me, to be completely honest, mainly because I cannot see Carolina being better than Ohio State, just because I've seen how good Ohio State can be. But as of right now, Carolina's ranked ahead, and obviously things are going to shift when Ohio State starts playing and everything like that. But the Tar Heels certainly didn't look bad on Saturday, a game where they had pretty much control. The team had control almost the entire game and really looked solid. I mean, there were very few times where the stadium was actually nervous for the team, where Virginia Tech would make runs, but you never thought that they were actually going to pull it off. Carolina maintains control of that game, wins 56-45. A little too many points given up by the defense, but I've seen that in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You could still be a really good team and have a lackluster defense. I mean, you look at LSU last year. They had a good defense, not a great defense. Certainly not an LSU typical caliber defense, and yet still won the national championship, win 15-0 behind Joe Burrow and Joe Brady, and had a great season. Carolina's going to have a great season regardless this year. This will be a great season. Doesn't matter really where the Tar Heels end up, whether or not we can win the ACC championship or something like that. But Carolina certainly looks good. Got to go to Tallahassee next week. Florida State, who's terrible, should be able to win there. And then we'll see how well Carolina can play against the ACC foes, as in Miami and Notre Dame down the road. Speaking of Miami, let's go a little bit farther south from Chapel Hill. Let's go down to Clemson, talk about Clemson, Miami. Now, those of you who I sent specific podcasts to knew my initial thoughts on Miami and knew how I was feeling about this game and were aware of my level of frustration with Miami fans. And for those of you who were just perchance wondering if my feelings towards Miami have potentially alleviated just slightly, no, they have not. I still think Miami fans are as delusional as I once did. I think they still are delusional. There are very few rational Canes fans, and it's honestly sad. I mean, I'm listening. Y'all may not know this guy, and that's perfectly fine. There's one main guy I watch on YouTube for college football purposes other than Uncle Lou, and that is Coach Coop. And he is a Miami fan. He lives in Eastern Tennessee, which is a very interesting spot to be a Miami fan, but he has a whole story on the back of that, and you guys can check out his YouTube channel if you want to learn more about the story. He makes really good content, though. He's very rational, likes to look into the stats, likes to look into the numbers, and I appreciate that because I typically like to do the same thing, although I do value the eye test more than really any number. I like sitting down, and if I can see a team playing well, even if they don't necessarily have the points to show for it, which is what happened in this game, I can still tell who was a dominant team and maybe what the score should have been for that matter. But Coach Coop does a great job of that. If you want to check out his YouTube channel, just go into YouTube and type in Coach Coop, COOP, and I'm sure it'll be the first link that pops up. Makes really good content, and he's a Miami fan. Made a reactionary video after the game, like 2 a.m. on Sunday, and was very was filled with humility, I guess you could say, was very honest about the Miami approach in this game and how Miami looked and how it was lackluster and all that. And he's great. But then there's this other dude, and I can't remember what this other guy is. He is a Miami fan, and he's got to be from South Florida, somewhere down there. He fits that attitude and all that craziness down there so well. And he was talking about how Clemson didn't do anything, and it was really self-inflicted penalties, and how it wasn't Miami's fault, and how it was the refs' fault, and how the refs did this, and this crap. So I think y'all could understand my frustration with that. Clemson, as I fully expected, thoroughly dominated Miami in all aspects of the game, in all stats of this game, and specifically in all coaching of this game and discipline, which goes into coaching if you think about it. Clemson, from start to finish, really for the exception of that first 4th down play, and the only reason why I say it was that first 4th down play is because that was the only time where you thought, man, maybe Miami actually has a shot here. But after that first offsides penalty and Miami gave the ball back to Clemson and we end up scoring the very next play on a great play design, which actually the first touchdown scored, the exact same play as the first touchdown scored against Miami in Coral Gables in 2015, I knew Clemson was going to be just fine. And if you look at the stats here, Miami has 210 total yards. The majority of those came on a flea flicker and a one long king run for like 70 yards, and that was it. Everything else, Miami was never able to get the run game going. The Brent Venables had an unbelievably good game plan, and this is what I expected. Clemson didn't look amazing against Virginia last Saturday, and I really expected Venables and Dabo to have these guys ready to rock and roll, and they certainly did. Clemson dominates this game from start to finish. Game never in question. Clearly the number one team right now, Clemson is in the nation. I really don't think there's an argument for any other number one team right now, which is why Clemson, I believe, got 54 out of the 57 total first place votes in this week's AP poll, the updated one for that matter. Clemson looks really, really strong right now. This final score of this game was 42-17. For those of you who watch this, you should agree with me here on this and if you don't feel the same on this, that's perfectly fine as well. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments and concerns in the chat or the comment section for that matter, and we can certainly discuss it going into the next podcast. But the final score here, we have 42-17. Honestly, this score should be about 63-10. Clemson had one. I just thinking back on the game right now, had one dropped touchdown pass, had one play that would have been a touchdown had it not been negated for a penalty, or would have resulted in touchdown probably in the next play, and then got stagnated at the 1 yard line with like 5 seconds to go in the game. So Clemson could have easily had 21 more points here, and then had we not kicked field goals, just refused to kick field goals, Miami would have only had 10 points. I mean, the defense gave up 10 total points to Miami in special teams. They had that block kick, a return for a touchdown, but is still a great win by Clemson. Clemson's got to go to Georgia Tech up here on this coming weekend. Georgia Tech is awful. Should be a thorough Clemson victory. I mean, we'll have to see how everything works out and shapes up in the ACC. But as of right now, I think Clemson and USC are clearly, well, maybe not clearly. Let me bridge it like this. I think there's a gap, a fairly wide gap between Clemson and UNC. And then I think there's a much narrower gap between UNC, Miami, and Notre Dame. I think those teams are almost interchangeable if you really wanted to. But I think there's a substantial gap between Clemson and 2, 3, and 4 right now in the ACC. And that's how you kind of expected it to be. However, that does not mean that gap is invincible. And one of these teams can certainly be able to will certainly be able to challenge Clemson in the ACC championship game, not named Miami. Miami's got no chance to beat Clemson. The problem with Miami, and it's not personnel. It's really not. Miami has the athletes to keep up with Clemson, especially on defense. The problem is there's no discipline. There just isn't. And there's Miami has 15 penalties for 135 yards. They had 210 total yards, so basically over half of their total yards were in penalty yards. Now, granted, I know the sum of the total yards does not include the penalty yards, but you guys get what I'm saying. Miami has 135 penalty yards, which is absolutely insane. You can't have that and win a game. Not to mention, they had 9 first downs, so Miami has more penalties than they do first downs. It's just Miami does not match up well with Clemson in terms of discipline, in terms of scheme, in terms of coaching staff and all that. It just is not the case. So that's enough on that. I've made my point clear about Clemson and Miami. I'm glad this game's over. I'm glad Clemson dominated as I expected us to do. And we'll have to see how both these teams shape up at the end of the year. Maybe Miami will fall off the side of the wall. No one knows. The last thing I'm going to talk about here within the ACC, I know we're getting a little longer here, is Notre Dame and FSU. Notre Dame didn't have necessarily a bad game against FSU. It was definitely closer than it should have been. FSU is a really, really bad team. I know some of y'all who have been watching my podcast here recently have heard me talk about that. I do not think FSU is a good team whatsoever. Losing to Georgia Tech is inexcusable. Now, granted, they did pull off the upset against Jacksonville State last week, which was a great win for FSU. Unbelievably good win. An incredible game for that matter. And come from behind all that, great for FSU. And Notre Dame did play well here for that in that second quarter. They took the lead of the game and really took command of that. But at the end of the first quarter, FSU was up 17-14. And how you're giving up 17 points in one quarter to Florida State is very problematic. Florida State hasn't scored 26 points against a decent quality team in forever. I mean, we're not talking Jacksonville State here, but I mean, when is the last time you can look at Florida State and they played a team with a pulse and they scored 26 points? You can't. You can't remember a time. And if they did, if you can subsequently think of one time, think about a second one. And I cannot remember one to the best of my knowledge where Florida State was able to score a decent amount of points against a halfway average team, much less an above average team like Notre Dame is with this. So that makes me a little bit apprehensive about Notre Dame and what the future for that team holds. I still think Notre Dame's a very, very good team. That matchup against Clemson in November is going to be an unbelievably good game, and I really look forward to that. But I have no clue how Notre Dame's going to look by that matchup. I think Clemson's got a lot of weapons right now. We look really, really good in the passing game and the running game, which is highly problematic, especially when Clemson's able to get Etienne out in space. You get him a little bit of room, just a little bit, and maybe one blocker, and that's all he needs. I mean, you can even forget the blocker. Sometimes he doesn't even need it. He can be so strong, can break tackles from almost all over the field, and is an overall great running back. So Clemson's definitely going to be a tough out as we move along here and we look at the future schedules and everything like that. Obviously, we have Georgia and Alabama, and then Carolina, Florida State, Clemson, and Georgia Tech. and that'll be in next week. So we'll make sure to talk about that next week in podcast number 6 after those games conclude. But yeah, so that's the main things for today. I don't really have too much more written down. Just a quick recap here. We talked about the SEC first, and we talked about how Georgia came back and had a pretty good defensive performance against Tennessee and really took command of that game in the second half. Alabama and Ole Miss can't stop nosebleeds on defense, which is very problematic for both of these teams, but especially Alabama, especially if they can't get that fixed before Georgia. We could be looking at a tough time for Alabama, although I fully expect the Tide to fix that and be able to shut down Georgia on defense. Florida and A&M turned out to be a good one. LSU's officially done a one-hit wonder. North Carolina, Virginia Tech. North Carolina looked very good in the game when the team wanted to look good, when we were able to finally put our foot down. Carolina looked very strong. Clemson, Miami. Clemson's still the king of the ACC. There was no shift in that last night. And Notre Dame and FSU, talking about how Notre Dame definitely not a bad win, but not a great win for that matter. All right, top teams in college football in no particular order, just grouping them together. Clemson, Alabama, Georgia. Is there really another team? Think about it now. I know I might catch heat for that. I know I might catch heat for it. And if you want to give me heat, that's fine. This is college football. Trash talk's part of that. Now you can talk to me all you want, but at the end of the day, is there another team that you want to put North Carolina in there? I don't think so. I don't think Notre Dame is in the upper echelon either. Clearly, what I'm trying to make a point right now is I think Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia are clearly on the top plateau, and I think Clemson is a little bit above that top plateau right now. And I think there's a relatively decent-sized gap between Alabama and Georgia and Notre Dame, Carolina, Ohio, well, not Ohio State. I think Ohio State's great, but Ohio State haven't played yet, so we don't know. Oklahoma State especially, and then you drop off the tiers from there. So, best teams in college football right now are Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia, and I don't think it's necessarily close. I think it's more about 1, 2, and 3, and less about the difference between 3 and 4 here. And so that's good. All right. So if y'all have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure to drop them in the comment section down below. I'll make sure to address them in the next upcoming podcast, which will be recorded and posted hopefully on Sunday night next week. I'll try to get all that done for y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed this one. Let me know how y'all liked it, and I will see you next Sunday.